like I kept hearing from tradcons that women shouldn't work, right? But I kept thinking, well, maybe if you have, like my grandma had 13 children. So that's a pretty strong case for not work. That's a lot of, but I'm like, we're having 1.5 in public school. What are you doing with your time?
Yeah, you're not even matching that.
I understand maybe like the first couple of years, but once the kid's in school, you could be a teacher and have the same schedule as the child.
Yeah, you know, I think
3 months off in the summer, it's a decent salary.
I think a lot of that also doesn't exactly match with history. So remember earlier I told you about how before the dowry, what you had was bride wealth, formerly called bride price.
Okay.
Most people know it as bride price. This is where the man pays the woman's family something, not to her family. Then they, as scholars studied it more, they changed the name from bride price to bride wealth because bride wealth describes it better. But back then, the reason that the man paid the bride wealth was because the woman worked. We're not just talking about kids. She was actually out there on the field. So back then, agriculture was less sophisticated. And that's why you see polygyny and bride wealth in places like sub-Saharan Africa. You saw that with ancient Israelites, even Old Testament and stuff like that. And you saw this in a lot of different civilizations. And then what they noticed is that as they changed from tools women can actually handle, like the digging stick or the hoe, and they moved to the plow. The plow is this heavy instrument that takes a lot of strength, and you got to have these, cattle in the front pulling it, and you're trying to keep it in a straight line. So men ended up doing this. But back then, when women were using these other tools, they would be out on the fields working all day, and when you married her, her family lost that labor value. So you paid them a set price, and then they used that money to marry maybe another son in their family, and then it became a circulating fund. So bride wealths are all uniform prices. It's not like this highest bidder thing. It actually is a set price.
So how many hours a day were the women work? I'm just trying, because I always hear that like women are very exhausted because they're working in human resources and they're just so tired. And so I've always wondered like what would be the comparison of what women did in different time periods to today. I just can't imagine it's easier or it's harder now. Yeah. But hey, I could be wrong.
That I'm not exactly sure, like in terms of what those specific women were doing. I hear it may be less depending. I think they probably work just as much, but I'd have to look at it.
Yeah.
What I will say is,
I just wonder what their day-to-day was like,
Yeah, I mean, they're out there on the fields, they're doing all this stuff. But what happens is the plow comes in. And when the plow comes in, one person can plow a field that's way more than humans can do with the digging stick or with the hoe. So you end up with a lot more essentially wealth because you're able to till a lot more land, plant a lot more food. So when the plow comes in, women start to become housebound because they're not needed to work on the field anymore. So and the men started doing it all because it was a harder job to do. And it was just creating a lot more wealth that you started seeing income stratification. So polygynous societies, bride wealth paying societies tend to be very uniform. There isn't this very rich guy and this very poor guy. They're all about the same.
Oh.
Okay? Yeah, and then...
So there's more polygamy when there's less income disparity, is what you're saying?
Yeah, polygyny. Polygyny meaning that a man marries multiple.
Okay.
And the thing is like, you might have a guy with more than one wife, but he had to pay that same uniform price. So it circulates around. So it brings him back into a kind of a match with everybody else's wealth by doing that. When the plow comes on, you start to see income stratification, okay? Now when a woman's working on the field, she's bringing in real income to the house. We're not talking about labor at home. We're not talking about making sourdough bread. We're talking about actual agricultural income. So stuff that needs to be produced, basically. When the men start doing that and the women are more homebound, you end up with this huge income stratification. There's rich, there's middle class, there's poor. And then what you start to see is it goes from bride wealth. So now the man is not paying her family anymore. Polygyny starts to go away. Divorce becomes rare. And then it starts to become monogamous because now private property is a lot more important. Paternity of the child's going to be a lot more important too, because now you're thinking about inheritances a lot more, how this passes down. The whole other side of the equation of marriage is actually inheritance also. And when you talk about marriage, inheritance and how wealth threads down through generations is really a part of that discussion. So as you start getting these class differentiations, families want to either maintain class or they want to go up a class. That would be hypergamy, technically, right? So to attract a high status mate, or at least a mate of equal status to you, and to be monogamous, they would attach a dowry to the daughter, which is part of her inheritance at the time of marriage. They would call it a pre-mortem inheritance, okay? So that happens, and then so what you end up seeing when you look historically, the people who marry each other tend to be from the same class. So they're making a financial contribution that's about the same. They're looking at what his income trajectory is gonna be, and they're looking at what she's bringing in from technically what is her inheritance, So it's interesting because then when you look at tradcons today, if we bring this all the way back to today, it's like the man needs to make all the money. The woman's not responsible for bringing anything. And it's just your job to figure out as a young guy, oh, and we want you to marry young, even though a dowry would help people marry young, because how else are you supposed to get this house? I mean, we're all waiting until we're 30, 31, 32 now anyways. So there are all these things that the dowry actually helped with. And back then there was no like welfare system or this kind of thing. You might have had some church charity or these kinds of things, but typically what you can expect in those societies, and I'm not talking about ancient time, it started to come in ancient times, but I'm talking even a few hundred years ago, is women without a dowry could not be expected to marry because that's how ingrained it was in the culture, so.
So what would happen to them? They would just be spinsters or what?
Yeah, they would probably just be at their house there. Some of them would end up joining a convent. There was still a fee to pay for that. It was just a lot less than the dowry. Or what would happen is they would end up working outside of the home to earn a dowry to then get married with. So you might find them being a servant in the house of a higher status family. And then part of that contract would be that family would then pay her dowry, so then she can then get married later. So you start to see, in bride wealth societies, people get married earlier and a lot younger over there. As dowry comes in, it pushes it back a little bit. Still relatively early for the way we do things nowadays. You start to see the sophistication and complexity in how society exists. So I've spent a lot of time looking at this just because it's really intrigued me. And now when I hear guys like Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, whoever it's going to be, I think Lila Rose is another one, they'll sit here and they'll make a big deal about monogamy and about all this stuff, but what they're trying to trade for is something that is really untenable. I mean, she can just leave with no-fault divorce. I think a lot of these women that say they're submissive aren't actually submissive. I mean, we're all growing up in the same culture, it seems like.
Yeah.
And then, the family law is waiting there on the other end to just really make it tough. It's really hard. So a lot of guys at this point are basically abstaining from it, or they're saying, all right, the long-term deal sucks here. What do I get out of this? I may as well just engage in short-term stuff. Or, the woman gets disappointed because the guy's playing her, and then she's like, oh, I thought he wanted to get married. He didn't want to get married. There's all this upset stuff going on because we live in this very weird gray zone where people want to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Yeah, because, there's a difference between a guy looking for like a hookup or a girlfriend and he being on like the marriage market.
Yeah.
So what incentive are they really giving men? They're not the dowry at least would lower the risk.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. It's funny because when you watch some of these panel shows or whatever, it's like women will say, oh, well, I'm a queen and this and that, or I should deserve a king or something like that. It's funny when you look at actual kings, to sit in the queen's seat, you had to come with some serious cash. Like you weren't just going there for no reason. And if he's going to marry someone that brings nothing just because she's so beautiful, everybody would look at him like he's the stupidest person on the planet. King Henry VIII is one that's kind of a famous, royal dowry story. The queen that he was married to, he's the one that ended up, breaking away from the Catholic Church. And his first wife that he was married to for like 20 years, she brought what was pretty much the annual income of all of England at the time, which is something that they needed. They have all the same problems up there.
Wow.
Yes. So if you're a woman and you say, you want to be the queen and you're bringing nothing, you have no contribution, it really is, the height of delusion. They need to look in the mirror and understand what class they're actually in.
It's kind of crazy that we're in a time where like basically a peasant woman can get a kid off of a king.
Unfettered hypergamy is what that is. The dowry used to be a check against that, because let's say these two found each other, okay, and somebody brings up marriage. Instantly it would be a rejection, because when they say, okay, let's talk about marriage, the marriage discussion is a very different discussion from dating or whatever. And I want men to remember this. I really do. I want men to remember how it was negotiated in the past. So as we go into the future, they can have something to say back to them that they can't be accused of not being masculine. So many masculine men in history did this, but they would say, okay, what's your dowry? What does your father do? What's your family background? And if the answer is nothing, I don't have a dowry to match this person up here, they'd be like, yeah, this marriage isn't going to work. You might want to look at someone closely to your class. So it's a check against that. So you can't just hide that. Nowadays, what you'll get is an actor, or you'll get an NFL player, and they'll marry somebody with nothing, and then they get dragged through the family law courts afterwards, and they're wondering what happened. So that's what we see nowadays, and a lot of this was encouraged from what I would say was very good economic times, probably through the wealth brought in from colonialism, brought in through industrialization, brought in through modernization. Especially post-World War II, it was a different kind of economy. You also saw this in Cyprus and places like that. So, Cyprus, the dowry was typically a house for the middle class. As it started to get modernized, and that was after England. England was like the first place, you can say. They start sending their kids over to England and places like that to get educated. They start to get urbanized. You start to get these mega cities. You start to get cheap apartments for rent. They're living away from their families. There's different jobs you can take now because of modernization. People who might have been at a lesser class can go jump up a class easier. So they're more focused on that. And I think what you ended up with was a kind of market bust, because a lot of guys here are saying, okay, well, I'm now worth more because I went to college and I have this job, where typically they would have married her. This family's probably having trouble getting her married. And you end up with this it's like a perfect storm, and feminism, all these things, changes in laws.
So it's a market bust, because now the kings are like having kids with basically like peasant women in a way, and vice versa.
It's harder to chart someone's income trajectory than it was back then. So that romantic love, the love match takes over. You start to see that in literature. You think about it, like the printing press, I think, came in the mid-1400s. Literacy rate was really low. Then they start making polyglot Bibles, and then they start making these tales of chivalry and these knights who would do these amazing things for women. That starts to get very popular. Literacy rate goes up, more people start to read, modernization. So there's a cultural change. And then, people start looking for their love story a lot more. But even as that goes, still for a long time, we were talking about Germany earlier, even into the 1850s, if you look at their records there, people who are getting married are still bringing, some kind of dowry or equal contribution. Then this basically falls out of favor. I think we're hitting a point now where the economy and the culture and life, they'll say, oh, chivalry's dead, whether you believe that or not. Women, Coach Greg Adams, we'll talk about the monetized dating marketplace.
Right.
Millennials are having trouble buying houses. You know what I mean? And what I'm seeing is a kind of similarity to the way economy used to be back then. Millennials might have a better time starting families and getting houses if the parents are more involved in terms of a wealth threading through the generations like they used to do for thousands of years. So we're in this very interesting time. And I think we're kind of pushing on something new in the culture, where I would like to see men at least remember this, so they don't have to feel like they're not a man if they ask for what's owed to them if they're going to be the provider. So my real first, axe to grind is with tradcons, so to speak, because they're the ones who are selling this stay-at-home monogamy with the man as this provider, the 100% provider. So that's where I've been at for a while now.
So what would happen if the daughter says, but Dad, I love him, or the son says, she's so hot.
Yeah.
What would happen if they told the parents no?
Well,
in those time periods.
Yeah, I mean, if you really went against your parents like that, instead of receiving your endowment.
Sorry, was this arranged? It was arranged, right?
Yeah, it's arranged. I think when it comes to arranged marriage, people have this sort of understanding that it's like, oh, it all happens from when they're 5 and they'll never have a say in it. What you have is like matchmakers and stuff like that. And you have, even if you look at more recent history, if you look at Europe and stuff like that, they would call it the mean person, so to speak. So this mean person will probably understand in the community who's single, what dowries they're bringing, what the men are going to be making. And then in their minds, they're going to be like, okay, these might be good pairings. They might suggest different pairings. And then however you guys do that negotiation, then it would happen. So then you can see in marriage contracts back then, how they do these kinds of things. If a daughter, to answer your question, was like, no, I don't, screw this, I love this person, Romeo and Juliet style or whatever. What would probably happen, I mean, and I know there's all stuff with the church and how that would probably be something different, but they would probably not receive their dowry, so to speak. So it would say you run off or you elope, so to speak, you're written out of your portion, your marriage portion, or if you're a son and you do the same thing, whatever your inheritance is going to be is going to go away. And that's a decision that you make. And nowadays in our culture, it's kind of the same thing. Parents aren't really expected to contribute anything in that regard. The future father-in-law, so to speak, men don't look at him and say, okay, what's the contribution from him? So there's been this change where the way wealth is threaded isn't really the same. And I mean, a lot of people are in a bad situation anyways. They can barely figure out retirement. They don't have something to give. Or the parents are already divorced. So the juice egg, that's one thing I knew from working at child support is like you'd have, especially when it was a family that they were married, when the divorce happens, whatever nest egg they had for those kids just gets juiced so fast.
Right.
Whether it's to the attorneys, or if it's just imagine being in one house, now you have 2 houses with 2 mortgages and 2 electric bills and 2 this, 2 that. So there's kind of not much left for the kids when it's their very important time of their lives to figure out what am I going to do.
As most of you know, I have been fighting on the front lines of the simp epidemic for years, but I need to tell you about a quiet weapon being ratcheted up against men that is rarely talked about. It's not just the relentless anti-masculinity propaganda and OnlyFans hoes causing the societal issues that we discuss on this show. Did you know that the average city's tap water contains trace pharmaceuticals and endocrine disruptors? This often includes estrogen from birth control. The average adult consumes a credit card worth of plastic every single week. That's 5 grams of plastic a week on average. So it's no wonder that the average male's testosterone is half of what the average was 50 years ago. Testosterone levels decline 1% a year, and without a course correction, we are headed towards extinction. No matter how based you are, you need to be naturally boosting your testosterone. My friends at CHOQ.com are on a mission to save mankind from extinction by boosting your vitality. Chalk's Male Vitality Stack contains premium and potent herbs clinically studied to naturally boost your testosterone levels, sperm count, and overall vitality. Just one of the many ingredients in the Male Vitality Stack was studied in double-blind human clinical trials to boost total testosterone 20% in 90 days. When you boost your testosterone, you'll have more mental clarity, you're more capable of making decisions and taking risks. Having high testosterone will also affect your pheromones, so women will find you more attractive subconsciously. Get the Chalk Male Vitality Stack right now on chalk.com. That's CHOQ.com. Use my name Pearl as your coupon code and you'll get 25% off site-wide on chalk.com. That's CHOQ.com. My name Pearl is the discount code.